no matter what your background is, whether your ancestors are from here or from Europe or Africa or Asia or South America, I think when you go out onto the land and you go out into these incredible places, there's something for us to learn. There's a message that's always waiting for us on the winds up there. And I think the more that we normalize talking about the emotional experience of it, the more commonplace it can become for us all to listen to that message.
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. These are the stories of people and projects who are not rising to the top of our newsfeed because, of course, the news and social media cannot seem to focus on what's right with the world. There are a few young innovators, influencers we call them, who are poised to have an enormous positive impact on our shared future, and our guest today, Connor Ryan, is one of them. He is an exciting figure in the world of professional downhill skiing, but also he is proud to be of Lakota heritage, and he is making waves off the slope as a sought-after speaker. He has an almost mesmerizingly beautiful way of bridging cultures and illuminating us all with his ability to translate the philosophies, mindset, and traditions of the Indigenous world. And I use that word illuminator very carefully because when I'm listening to Connor, it feels like he's turned on the light in a room I didn't even know I was standing in. What Connor is doing for all of us is akin to acting as a translator for a vast cultural worldview of the indigenous peoples in North America. And at the same time, he's pointing to fresh, powerfully useful ways of considering our own relationships and situations and challenges right now. Connor's journey is anything but conventional, and that too makes for an enjoying episode. In fact, this interview was so fascinating that I asked Connor back for a part 2. So after you're done, check that out. We have a very interesting twist on the New York Times that we do in that episode. You'll love it. Thank you and welcome, Connor Ryan.
Hi, I'm so stoked to be on with you, Dr. Linda.
We have to start with your story. I don't often start with people's story because I want to jump right in and offer folks a great insight. And we have that. We have so many insights today that I think we're going to get there just fine. Tell us about your growing up story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I would start by saying that my story starts before me by a couple generations. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. So on my mother's side of the family, my story starts in what's now South Dakota, North Dakota. And my grandfather was born on the Standing Rock Reservation. And when he was a young boy, his family experienced some tragedy. There's some, confusion as to exactly what it was, but he ended up an orphan with his grandmother. And the Catholic schools came for him at that time. And for those who don't know, there was a period of time in the United States and Canada from the late 1800s until the 1980s or so. I think it went clear into the 90s in Canada, which is the residential school and the boarding school times. And so my grandfather was taken to the Catholic schools from the reservation when he was a boy. And they cut his hair and they changed his name. And, they raised him with the name of a saint far away from his homelands and far away from his culture. And those schools were a feeder to the military. And so in 1942, at 15 years old, he ended up on a boat in the Pacific fighting in World War II. And through the course of that, ended up becoming a prisoner of war there on the Pacific front, and really just had a really traumatic start to his life in that way. And so when he returned home from the war, he never truly made it home. He made it as far as Los Angeles, where he spent most of his life in and out of addiction and in and out of the carceral system. And so that's where he met my grandmother, and they gave birth to my mom, and she was raised there in Compton and Watts in Los Angeles during the time of the Watts fires.
Wow.
And so my family came up through a lot of that and facing a lot of adversity, and one thing that we didn't have after all that had happened was a strong cultural connection. For my mom, she didn't know that she was who she was until she was a young woman, or where her family had come from. She didn't get to have a relationship with my grandfather because of the trauma in his life. So for me, my story starts with her. And my mom moved to Boulder, Colorado, to attend the University of Colorado when she was a young woman, and that's where she gave birth to me, and that's where I grew up. I mean, it's just on the southwest edge of our traditional homelands. We'd have been typically more to the northeast, but on those prairies of Colorado and Nebraska, South Dakota, those places. And so as I grew up and was a young man, I always had a sense that something was missing. I grew up with this, oh, like we are from the Standing Rock Indian Reservation and we're
Okay.
Lakota Sioux and this knowing of that, but I never really knew what that meant and what I was supposed to do about that. And after high school, I failed out of college. I was having addiction and substance abuse issues. And as I kind of found my way through that, I got connected with some folks who practice my culture. And so I went up to South Dakota and went to an event there, just looking to meet someone who was, my people, my family, somebody who could teach me something about this. And I actually happened to meet some incredible folks there who are Lakota, and folks who knew our cultural ways, who actually lived down in my area around Denver and Boulder. And so that's really where it began for me.
Mm.
And that same fall that I was going back to the Black Hills for the first time, and, getting ready to do ceremonies and sweat lodge and things like that for the first time, was also the year I bought my first pair of skis. And I'd gone skiing some as a kid and really remembered it as this definitive thing that connected me to nature. And so side by side those two passions kind of grew. I started to learn some songs and learn my language a little bit, and at the same time skiing was this thing that was constantly pulling me out into the mountains and out into nature. And as someone who grew up in the city and the suburbs more so, that was this really healing circle that was kind of growing around me from both sides of understanding my connection to nature through my culture, but actually feeling connected to nature through my sport. And so, I had my fair share of ups and downs still as I was learning all that. But by the time I think I was about 26, 27, I felt really caught between these two different worlds
Yeah.
of being like, I'm indigenous, I'm Lakota, and I feel this obligation to nature and to my culture and to the people. And on the other side of me, anytime it snowed, all I wanted to do was just go up to the mountains, run away from all my responsibility and be in this place where I could just feel connected and feel plugged into these ecosystems around me, these peaks that were holding me. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I turned to my culture to try to help me discern that. And so I did a hamblecha, which is a traditional Lakota vision quest, fasting, no food, no water for days, and crying, essentially mourning
Yeah.
and crying out to the universe for a purpose. And in the course of this vision quest, I had a vision, and the vision that I had was a ski movie. Funny enough, and
Funny enough.
it was something that was kind of humbling for me to come into a relationship and figure out. But that's what gave me my purpose, was over the next few years figuring out how to make a film, essentially translating the sense of responsibility and connection that I feel to place and that I believe everyone can and does feel through sports like climbing and mountain biking and skiing and all those beautiful things that put us out there in these spaces. And so I made this film, Spirit of the Peaks, which helped me to, translate all those ideas into something that everyone could share and be a part of. And that film was wildly successful. It won a bunch of awards. And more importantly, it helped me start a bunch of programs to get Native folks, the ability to try skiing, try snowboarding, whether it's kids or adults. We have different programs that we've worked with all across the country, and just giving other people from a similar background to mine that ability to go out there and experience those things, because I think there's probably somebody out there who, given that same connection, can do even more than I can with it. And then the flip side of that film and that story and the work I do now being, I think no matter what your background is, whether your ancestors are from here or from Europe or Africa or Asia or South America, I think when you go out onto the land and you go out into these incredible places, there's something for us to learn. There's a message that's always waiting for us on the winds up there. And I think the more that we normalize talking about the emotional experience of it, the more commonplace it can become for us all to listen to that message.
Connor and I met at an amazing social innovation event, 2 days, lots of speakers. And the minute Connor started speaking, I knew that I had to bring his viewpoints and his really fresh perspectives to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. You said in that talk, you can't raise buffalo, you can only restore the prairie. Now, this gets to the heart of both the macro and the micro level of what's going on in our world right now, both in climate change and so forth, and in society, how we get along. Give us your take on this. You can't raise buffalo, you can only restore the prairie.
Yeah, this kind of lesson for me, it started a couple years ago when I met some local folks at the farmers market who sell buffalo. And as a Lakota, that was our sacred animal, really central to our culture and everything that we did. And so to see some ranchers who probably have a little different outlook on life than I do doing this work, before I was going to buy anything from them, I came up and I asked them, how they do what they do. And essentially, to me, their reply was that they don't. And for me, it was actually kind of the best answer they could have given, because everything that I've come to understand as a Lakota, but also as a bit of a, citizen scientist and investigator and someone who really cares about climate, I've seen that there's no one solution that I felt like we could lean into all the way that was a cure for climate and food systems and all these things at the same time. But what I saw as I looked around the world was all these different places where every culture and every ecosystem and all these groups of people, but also, our relatives who have four legs or wings or who slither or crawl on the ground, that they all really belong in a different series of connections and families and networks together. So when I would hear things, like, oh, if we could all just be vegan, or if we could all just do this or do that, it would solve all these crises. And I think the issue was that I saw with it is that it always still kind of put ourselves at the center of healing. And for me and my experiences on planet Earth, most of the things that I've seen heal, often a lot of the things that I've seen heal inside myself, didn't do that because of me. They did it because I gave room to the systems which naturally do that work. And I think sometimes we're so quick to put people at the center of the story of ecology that we forget that these systems function without us. And so in the case of the buffalo, the way that it works for them is that buffalo need to have a diversity of prairie grasses to eat in order to be healthy. Unlike a cow, you can't just feed them whatever, right? And they'll grow and you can slaughter them and this and that. Buffalo are much more emotionally sensitive and ecologically sensitive. And so really what these ranchers told me was all that they could do to make their herd stronger was to make sure that all these different types of grasses are growing. And when we're out there in these places that are farmland and ranch land now, I think it's easy to forget that they were prairie before. And that in a prairie, you would have a root zone as deep and as biodiverse as those grasses were tall. And that not only was there this diverse ecology under the soil, but then that gave room for, the birds and the bugs and all these things making its progression all the way up to the buffalo. And so the buffalo can't really live without the birds and the bugs and all those things. And so for me, I think it became this quick demonstration of like the things that we want most, the world that we envision the most. And for me as a Lakota, that's buffalo roaming on the prairie again. That in order to get to those places, what we have to do is learn how to maybe take ourselves out of the role of protagonist in the healing of the planet and allow ourselves to sometimes play that role of witness and seeing what all of these other relatives, all of these other species in the space can do and have always done for us.
That is a beautiful way of thinking about the whole thing. And that brings up something that I was going to ask you quite a ways down in this interview. But there was a part when in the interview we talked about the fact that people always say, "Can we save the earth?" And that seems so misguided after what you just said, because the earth is sort of already saving itself. Talk to us about that since we're right there.
Yeah, I think we have that perspective a lot of times. Like I said, that just puts us as people right in the middle of it, right in the thick of things. And to me, I would say that that's a human centric view of the world. And the issue is that ecosystems are almost never human centric, and in most cases, it's the human interruption to an ecosystem that has disturbed it. Right. So if we stop looking at the planet, as just like a bunch of random things, hodgepodge, stuck on a sphere, and instead look at it as, one organism, right? Then we become just like a cell or an organ with a particular function on this planet. And just like any other being, there's cells, there's organs, there's
Yeah.
things throughout the course of evolution that the organism decides, okay, this isn't beneficial to the whole anymore, right? And so I think sometimes we've got to, let go of our attachment to this idea that people,
Yeah.
we're the brains of the planet or we're the heart of the planet. When at the moment, like we might just be more of a diseased gallbladder,
Yeah.
And I think that's a really hard thing to do as the species that is meaning makers, is art makers, is music makers, right? And we want to value our uniqueness for that. But I think sometimes we forget our role, like I said before, as the observer. And so I think we're quickly on the verge of this point of figuring out, okay, like what is it going to be like then to observe these changes that make human life impossible. And there's ways that we are perpetuating it. And in most cases, there's ways that we're forced to participate in systems that perpetuate the downfall of our species, right?
Mhm.
That make us more of a gallbladder than a liver or a stomach, because the work that we're doing collectively as a species, just making as much stuff as we can, making as much profit as we can, isn't actually a biological function that the rest of the organism, Earth, needs to see happening. And so I think like that's really the question that we've got to ask ourselves is like, okay, as the meaning makers, the music makers, the ones who are witnessing all this, do we value our role in just being able to exist and appreciate where we are enough to put aside our desire to be so purposeful, our desire to have dominion over the rest of the species? Because if we don't do that, we'll find ourselves gone. We'll unfortunately take a lot of species with us, and the Earth will move on. Right? There are species that have, survived levels of climate change and evolved through levels of cataclysm that are far beyond what we, might be able to bring about in the near future, whether
Yeah.
it's, through pollution or climate change or any of those things. And so I think that's really the question of our time is like human purpose.
Right.
And can we be content with a purpose that is just appreciating these things? And then
Mhm.
if we can agree that's a good enough of a purpose to just appreciate being on Earth, then we change our priorities in order to match that, so that we can ensure the continuity of the value that our species can provide to the organism of our planet as a whole. Otherwise, evolutionarily, Earth's going to move on and evolve on without the organ that is the human species.
Well, I'm sure your choice about referring to the gallbladder was probably not random. I mean, people get their gallbladder taken out every day and the body just goes right on.
Exactly. And I think, when we look back at like how a practice like traditional fire practices that indigenous tribes had here
Right.
in North America, like when we were doing that, ooh, we served like a very clear function for all the grazing animals, right?
Right.
And so I think it's finding those ways again to value our role within the functionality of the whole.
That is a very, very big point. And it comes to something, ooh, I just got goosebumps. It comes to something that the really big takeaway from that talk that you guys gave. Let's talk about language because,
Mhm.
language is such an important part of being a human being. And language so defines our beliefs or our limiting beliefs, right? Like language is the almost like the water we're swimming in. And you made a point that in the Lakota language, it was never set up to separate things. So we're probably pretty far off the mark when we think of ourselves as separate from the fire or the prairie or the sky right from the get-go. We're in trouble because we think of our separateness. But talk to us about the Lakota's language about wholeness.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for us, it's kind of at the center of our perception. I think that so many of us get framed into a sort of like Eurocentric binary worldview that's based on like Judeo-Christian traditions,
Mhm.
right? Where you have like a heaven and a hell, you have a God and a devil, and you have good and bad. And if English is your language, then you kind of move from that like dualistic
Yes.
binary all the time. And the thing that I would say is like the biggest difference maybe for us in Lakota is that like it doesn't the words don't exist in poles, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Like good exists separate of bad, right? And we know that because of the way that we make our words in Lakota. And once you learn this, to me anyways, it becomes kind of crazy that not every language operates this way. But in
Right.
Lakota, the words are made as if they were an equation of the syllables. And every syllable has meaning, right? And so you put these meanings together to make a word. So when that happens, then in order to build or understand the concept of good, you don't need to have a polar opposite for it to exist in reference to,
Right.
because you can understand that the parts that make up the word add up to that, right? So the word and the language exists in greater reference to itself and the actual construction and sound of the words than it does to the other words in the language that are not it. And I know that's kind of a heady idea, but I think the simplest way to like take it back to an easy understand place is like in Lakota, like we had no word for nature, right? Because like it wasn't something we could enter or leave. It was like the ground state of existence. And so then, we are constantly asked to speak into these spaces about conservation and all these things. And I think it becomes really easy for these ideas to get misconstrued. But then when we take it back more simple to just the place of like, how does it feel? Then Lakota becomes like a really simple language to speak about these things again. But I think in reference to everyone being educated in one particular way and in one particular family of languages, particularly
Yeah.
like coming from all these Latin based languages, it can just be really hard for us to have this concept that like there's feelings that we feel that we can't put into words,
Yeah.
right? So in Lakota, like we have this understanding of like, okay, like why do miracles happen, and like why do the seasons change, and why do all these mysterious parts of the universe that we can't understand, why do they operate? And when we think about those things, like when you think about like how it looks when the leaves change, and you think about how it feels when someone tells you this miraculous piece of news that you can't understand, for me anyways, that's a very similar, oh, that comes from the same place when I
Right.
feel into it, right? And so then when we use our words to express that, in Lakota we say daku wakan skan skan, and it's all those things. It's why the seasons change. It's why miracles happen. It's why a healing can happen from a ceremony. But it's one thing because it feels that way. There's a continuity to it, and I think that's one of the best references for that difference. Is like English, you speak it from your head, and Lakota, you speak it from your heart. And so English can be great, for we're just breaking down the differences between things. But when it comes time to like feel our collective similarities and truly discern our feelings, I think sometimes that's where we get a little lost and we don't just have words that feel the way they sound and sound the way that they feel. And so I think something's lost there in that art of vibration and communication.
Is there any way that non-Lakota speaking people can get closer to that feeling? I guess we're talking about a feeling. Like, is it about sitting in nature more, it just being?
I think that's exactly it, personally.
Okay.
I think it's important for us to remember that whether it's Lakota or any indigenous language that arose anywhere, whether it's in Europe or Asia or Africa or on any continent, right? All of our original language comes from that, right? Comes from the silence and from us being able to discern the difference between ourself and the silence. But if you're going to start to understand that, you start with the silence, right? That's the ground floor. That's the control variable in the
Right.
experiment of what am I as an entity in this world. And I think it comes just from listening and from that time in nature. And for us, that's where most of our words arose from, right? Was from
Yeah.
looking at things in nature and being like, oh, this feels like it sounds like this. And that's the start of a syllable. And then you put a few of those syllables together and you have a word, right? And I think that's like an exciting way of engaging our brains. And so that would be my biggest advice to anyone is like sit in nature and see what words, not they're not going to be in English obviously, but see what words nature has to offer you, right? For us in Lakota, there's a basis to a lot of our songs that is this melodic singing that we believe came from what we first heard in the
Oh,
sound of the winds moving through the trees in the Black Hills,
right.
right?
Okay.
And so I think like wherever you're at, whoever you are, there's a song in the
Yes.
trees and in the hills and in the grasses around you. And I think connecting back to a part of language that's more about feeling than it is about thinking starts with hearing that.
I'm glad you shared that with us because, through this interview, I'm sure people are going to feel like I feel like I wanted to be closer to what you know. You were when I came back from that conference, you were one of the very first emails I wrote. And, I that makes it doable, what you just suggested, right? And a lot of people don't have access to nature like you and I do, but I'm sure it's sitting in the park and watching an ant and just observing an ant in a city,
Yeah,
or now we've got wildlife in cities. Sit on a
yeah,
park bench and see the coyotes come out at night and so forth. I mean, like there's probably access to this for everyone. This being just present in the lives and life around us wherever it is.
absolutely. I mean, for me, that's a big focus. Like a lot of the work that I do on the day to day is about getting indigenous folks, Native American people out to be able to ski,
Yeah.
to
Okay.
experience some of that. And then the big part of it on the other side for me of that is being able to translate what I feel in nature that I think people who climb and ski and hike or even just sit in the park feel.
Yeah.
And taking that and learning how to translate that, through a Lakota filter
Right.
back into English so that everybody can pick it up. Because I think, like, as you were mentioning, like, not everybody has access to nature. But I think there's also a part of it that's not everybody is able to see the reflection of themselves in the nature around them because everything's nature, right? Like I got a wooden desk here. Like this was a tree once,
Yeah.
and I go outside and there's some concrete. Well, that concrete was rocks and they were mashed up and the lime was added, right? And all these things. So sometimes I think so much has been done to nature that we can't see the nature in it. But I think that's also a valuable reflection of the environments that we put ourselves in, also put us in a place sometimes where we can't see the nature
Right.
in ourselves anymore.
Oh my. This is so great. Okay. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Connor about his ability to be this translator, and we're going to have him translate some more ideas and concepts to us. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time or maybe even the emotional stamina to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So, if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness. Okay, we're back. So Connor up at the top talked about this yearning that he recognized in himself that was just sort of under the surface, and he was probably dealing with it lots of ways with addiction and all those kind of things until he happened upon this life experience that opened up a new landscape and answered some pretty deep questions. Is that a good way to describe what happened, Connor?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's this common yearning, right? Like what I was thinking through the whole thing was how many of us are all walking around with this kind of brokenness that comes from a common yearning. What can you say to us on that?
Yeah, I think for me, like my relationship to that really started when I was young. And I could just remember walking around places, like in high school and having this sense of feeling just different than what I think the place wanted me to become, and something different from the process that was ongoing in so many of my peers. And I don't say that to differentiate myself from anyone else, because I'd imagine that everybody in those same spaces along me felt the same way. And I just feel lucky as a Lakota, like I probably had quicker access to some other vocabulary to help me understand what it is that I was feeling. But I remember being offered this class, and looking back now, maybe I should have taken it, but they taught you a class in my high school that would teach you how to like balance a checkbook or know how to pay your taxes or, do a resume and all these things. And I kind of just remembered having this feeling as a kid of being like, whatever all that is that fits into that class is really what I know that I don't want. And as I got older, I found different ways to relate to this. And I think one of the ones that really helped me the most and was a definitive turning point in my life was I read a lot of stuff from Joseph Campbell, specifically Hero with a Thousand Faces. And I started to sort of build this understanding of the commonality of story between cultures. I think there's something integrally human about storytelling. I think that's something that probably defines us at a certain point from our ancestors who were other than human. I think we started to become more human when we started to tell stories to one another. And so for me, I think that's a lot of where this yearning comes from, because for all of our human evolution, and especially now, we're bombarded with stories. all the time, right? And you open up your phone and you've got a collection of 10, 15, 30, and 60-second stories. And then you can sit down and you can sit at the TV and you've got a collection of 20, 1 hour, and 2 hour stories, right? But that's really all that we know how to do with one another as people, right? You write a song, and that song is a love story or the story of a hero or whatever it might be. And so for me, what I realized was that all those things that I could define that were in that class, the balancing the checkbook, the paying the taxes, the XYZ, and for me at certain points in my life, it was even going to school, right? Were these things that I perceived as a roadblock to being a story. And for me, that was really what I wanted. And I looked at the systems around us. I looked at the origins of the education system, at the time that they arose and what their intentions were, and realized like, okay, like schools arose in the world, right? At the time that we were transitioning from living like village kind of lifestyles to living like urban and industrialized lifestyles. And so for me, that kind of became this differentiating point of when people still got to grow up with the opportunity to become a story, as opposed to this time when now so many people grow up with aspirations of an occupation. And to me, the real discerning thing there is the differentiation of values that we're allowed to represent as we do that. And it's not to knock anybody who their story was that they grew up and had an occupation and provided some incredible opportunity for the next generation, because that's exactly what my mom did for me. And I'm incredibly grateful to her for having gotten educated and providing me all the opportunities that we have. But that's one kind of value system, right? That's oriented around like, okay, I'll take care of my family in this one way. But what if you find yourself at a point in the world where your values are opposed with some problem in the world that can't be solved occupationally? And so for me, I think that's so much of where my yearning comes from. And so much of the yearning I see in others is like, you have a desire to be remembered by your community. You have a desire to be valued by the people who share your same values. And often the only way to get to the place where we can truly capture something grand and bring it back to our community, bring it back to those who share our values, is to go on some grand adventure.
Right.
And it turns out that's kind of why that's the theme of every story we've ever been telling for as long as forever. And so then, why wouldn't we personally have the desire to reflect the individuals in the stories, right? That we're told, the heroes and the heroines, and even, the sidekicks and the villains and all of those things, that they're meant to represent these values, which then we get to relate to and take out into the world. And so for me, my yearning came from that of, I'll sleep in my car, I'll make a movie on a whatever budget needs to make it happen. I'll do this, I'll do that. I'll take these risks in the mountains as a skier. I'll, do all these things because like I want to have that adventure. I want to risk something in order to have something to bring back and to share.
That is such a great synopsis of a lot of the tension, I think, that folks feel. And then, yeah, what do you think about this? I can't help but think while you're talking about story, about and yearning, what's happened with our digital lives is you can't tell a good story in 40 seconds. You can't tell it in a text. It's not even legal to write a text long enough to tell a story, right? Like, how many people harass their parents because they write them a text message that's this long? That's because
That's
we're
just
trying to
one
tell.
paragraph.
Right. You get one paragraph to tell the story of why you're late to pick them up at the soccer. No, it's won't work. Like, think about this: email, text. The shortening window that we get to make a video. We can't tell our story anymore, and then we can't be heard. We can't really feel any validation except for the number of likes or shares we got. That's it. This is a
Right.
really broken
I want to
direction.
tell a story so good someone's inspired to cook me a meal or invite me over for tea,
Yes.
and like, what happened to that ability to do that, you know? And I think like that's the yearning. Like we know that like our sense of belonging in community is derived from our individual story.
Okay, so I I'm not putting you on the spot. You don't have to fix all our problems here today, Connor. But from what you know from this other way of looking at reality in an existence, a human existence, what would we do if people, realize that you and I have stumbled upon a topic that we didn't plan to talk about, but if people sort of are saying, yeah, that's what I'm feeling, is it about really just trying to get in real community with people and just do real things with people and just be present with others? Does it come down to that we need to tune out our digital lives a bit more or a lot more and just be present in nature, be present with each other, be present in the activities that make our heart soar? Is that a good takeaway for those of us who wouldn't be able to access the perspective you've gotten?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's being radically present, seeing what that does for ourselves and our lives, and then further adjusting our lives and our values to reflect that. You know what I mean? So like as you bring this up to me, the thing that it makes me think of is like really our collective participation that stops us from having that free time to like be present, right? And so like we exist in an economic system which like its success is dependent on the judgment of like, did the GDP like grow year to year, right? And we're all just like growing some imaginary thing that we can't really touch with most of our time. And so I think like it's that shift of values to value the times when we're not productive in the same way. And I guess like a quick anecdote on this that I found really fascinating is I was reading this book not too long ago, and it's called The Dawn of Everything. And in The Dawn of Everything, they have this chapter where they're talking about Mayan and Aztec civilizations, Mesoamerican civilizations, and the continuity for how long they existed. And they're around for thousands of years, right? But what they found is that we didn't really ever study them in these periods of time where they weren't making these massive monuments, right? These things that like collectively, like an emperor or someone had to order all the people to go build this monument. And that in turn, there were other times in their history where there wasn't an emperor and they all kind of just governed themselves and chilled and had enough to eat and just, hung out, right? But we don't study that period of time because instead of making these great works of art, they found that instead in those periods of this time, most people would just have small, maybe even mediocre, right? Little works of art in their own homes made by one another in their community. And I think that's like a bit of where we're at is like, what is that monstrosity that they just built in Vegas with all the screens around it that you could see from space? And like sometimes we're too worried about building that for someone that doesn't exist, that our hands aren't free to sew, something for someone we love, to knit them a sweater, to make a doll for our own kids anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's determining like what really is like the value of freedom that we want to choose, and is it that freedom of choice of our presence, or is it the freedom of choice with our purchase? And I think that's going to be one of the defining factors for us as people to move forward is like maybe we just value not doing things as well but doing them together, like it doesn't have to be the Super Bowl for you to have fun playing games in the park with your friends, right? But everybody sets aside the day for the Super Bowl. How many times do you set aside a day to go just toss the ball around in the park with your friends? So,
oh my gosh. I think we're going to have to talk a second time. I totally do not want to miss all the other great topics that we wanted to cover today, but we've gone off into some major lovely territory here that I think are very, very helpful and useful ways for us to think about, how we spend our days, and days go by and then they become years and who knows. So, okay. So, one of the things I really wanted you to share with us is this concept, if you will, of the colonial worldview versus an indigenous world. If you could take us out on that, I've got one more question, but if we could really understand how that whole thing informs what you're doing now in the world, Give us a little smattering of that.
Yeah, for sure. I think an important place that I like to start anytime we're talking about colonialism is like, let's start by talk about like, what is a colony, right? And a colony is a place that has been turned into a profit center for another community, for another place, right? So the original colonies here were, spotted along the East Coast, and their job was they were sending resources, information, all these things, right, back to Europe.
Yeah.
Right. But then colonies exist today. And one way I like to break it down is, and that helps in my communities in the mountains, is that ski towns are often colonies. Right. So you live in this little beautiful place up in the mountains and it's perfect and picturesque, besides the fact that your economy can't really function there because the intended construction of the entire place was for it to generate money for some shareholders somewhere in a room in the big city. Right. So that's what a colony is then and now, right? Is a place where we're turning relationship, where we're turning a place into profit, where we're turning relationship into profit. And so then when we look at it on this broader worldview and contrast it with, I use my indigeneity and Lakota culture, but I think it applies with almost all indigenous cultures worldwide. Instead, we start looking at the place in a relationship as opposed to looking at a place as an opportunity. Or maybe I think one of the most important ones that I like to focus on in the environmental spaces where I'm often asked to speak is how do we turn these things we see as resources and shift our perspective so that we see them as relatives, right? So when we're talking about a mountain, right, it's very easy to be like, okay, so there's gold inside of that mountain. So let's blow it up. Let's fill it with holes. Let's strip mine it, the whole thing, blah, 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 because this gold is so valuable. And we can put this obvious dollar sign on the value of this gold. But the issue then, if you're just seeking one resource, as opposed to looking then at this network of relatives that's in a place, is that when you go and do that, okay, well, you're going to change how the water flows in that place and what's in the water and what can grow in that immediate area. And you might be changing relationships that have existed for thousands of years, right? And so the issue that I have with that colonial worldview, so particularly, is that there's not a value placed on relationship, right? And it's nice to think somewhere on an equation on a chalkboard or somewhere in a boardroom for a venture capital firm, like that's what really matters, right? We need money, we need jobs, we need blah, blah, blah. And so really in the colonial worldview, like that's what's sacred, right? The job is the sacred thing because the job is the source of life. But then when we look at our relations out in the natural world, that's not reflected. Like the squirrels, no job. Deer, no job. Fish, no job. Everybody living content, happy, right? And so what then is the value of those other lives, of those other relationships? And especially what is their value in continuity, right? So like, what is it worth for one person to be rich? Is that more valuable than, okay, you kill, an acre of forest and it's 50 squirrels and it's 10 deer and it's blah, blah, blah. Like maybe at one point you can justify that, right? For one generation, for one transaction. But the problem then is in continuity. It's not really one that you're disrupting, right? It's not one mountain. It's not one watershed. They're all connected to each other. Right. And so what is the value in dollars of a deer being alive and living a content life? Right? It doesn't account for that. And then as we look at everything else, we also realize like it doesn't account for that in us and in our values. Right. And I think that's the hardest part of it, is that like we are guiding our world with a compass that doesn't point to our north, right? Because I think for so many of us, like we do the colonial, capitalist, whatever dance in order to have the relationality, right? But we get a minuscule piece of it, right? We get to maybe care for our kids and our parents and our grandparents or whatever. And wow, you really made it if you could take care of your kids and your grandparents and this and that, right? But the nature of that transaction then is that if you participated in the colonialism to get there, which we all have to,
Yeah.
right? Then where are the other lives? Where are the trees who were just your toilet paper in the process of you going to the office and having your coffee every day, right? Like there's lives that you're
Slimes.
wiping your butt with. Like there's something that's not accounted for that we know that we value because we're doing this whole other system
Right.
to have the relationships that we value, right? And so for me, indigenizing that worldview, decolonizing that worldview is about, okay, how do we focus on getting to the ends of this system that we know that we want, right? Like we want to be fed, we want to have, you know, water to drink and a place to sleep, and we want to be in community and we want to be able to share those things with each other, right? And right now we're doing all these unnecessary steps to be able to get to that in the end. And so I think that's really the shift of decolonizing the world is about, okay, like how do we focus then on like our individual communities where we're at, being able to be self-sufficient and more than just, because I'm not a homesteader or a prepper or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
For me, I think that self-sufficiency starts with how we see ourselves and the relationship in the community that we
Yes.
want to have around us. And so I think that's really the secret of it is like decolonizing is coming out of alienation, right? And decolonizing is coming out of separation. And instead, it's coming back into relation and into this space of, I'm going to do these things based on what feels right for me and what feels right for others, and not having to justify, okay, well, I need to make this job the most important thing if I'm going to end up with food and water someday. And all of us saying, okay, forget the job. Let's focus on the food and water. Let's focus on the community. Let's focus on the bringing the people together. And just as we always have for all of humanity, if we bring the people together first, we'll figure out how to meet our needs. That's always how it works.
Yes.
And
Yes.
instead, we've been caught in this paradigm of meet your needs, and then maybe you can have some community for dessert. And so I think that's really our shift. And I think it's an important thing as we have that conversation and talk what the values are at the center of it, is to remind people that decolonizing is for everybody, right? And as Indigenous people, or maybe for our Black brothers and sisters, that experience of colonization is closer, so we have a very distinct map of how it happened to us and how we think to get out of it.
Right.
But that colonization, that process of turning your place into someone else's profit center, that's happened all around the world. It's just as true for someone who lives in the Alps in Switzerland
Right.
as for me who lives next to a ski area here in the Rockies in Colorado. And so yeah, I think it's our collective liberation to just get to be in relationship once again.
Okay, Connor, I'm just going to have to show people. I've been writing down timestamps of some great moments in this conversation and other ideas that I wanted to have time to ask you about. I very seldom ask people back for a second interview, but you are so wisely translating what you know from both worlds in a way that ordinary people like me can understand and get excited about. Will you come back and talk to us another time?
Oh, I would love to. This is a really special space for me. I
Okay.
do so much that's just focused on
Yeah.
skiing and the mountains
Yeah.
and how to apply this
Okay.
there. And so
I'm going to
ski
try
takes
and
on-
catch you before ski season starts because my daughter co-founder warned me. You better grab Connor right now, or the podcast will be last on his list once the ground is covered with white.
Well,
Okay.
she's kind of right, but I also will gladly make space for you.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to end here, not with my
Yeah.
normal ending to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. We're going to just pause. We're going to consider this a pause, and I'm going to email you right away, probably tomorrow morning, about when we can have a part 2 to this conversation. There is so much here, and you are such a wise translator. I feel very, very fortunate, and I know our audience will too, that you are bringing these fresh perspectives to all of our worlds. So, okay, I'm gonna sign off for today. I hope all the wonder and perspectives that we've heard today from Connor Ryan will take you through your week, and look for part 2 of the conversation on the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast with Connor Ryan. Thank you so much, Connor.
Thank you, Doak Shah. I'll see you next time.